Well, good evening. I'm so pleased to see such an incredible turnout tonight, and not at all surprised for this really exceptional exhibition and for our guests. Thank you for being here. My name is Pam Franks, and I am the class of 1956 director of the Williams College Museum of Art, and it is truly an honor to introduce tonight's program. I want to start with a land acknowledgement. I am delighted to welcome you all as we gather together in this space at Williams College, which we respectfully acknowledge sits on the ancestral homelands of the Stockbridge-Munsee Mohicans, who are the indigenous people of the region now called Williamstown. Following tremendous hardship after being forced from their valued homelands, they continue as a sovereign tribal nation in Wisconsin, where they reside today. We pay honor and respect to their ancestors past and present as we commit to building a more inclusive and equitable space for all. Tonight, we're celebrating the opening of Emancipation, the Unfinished Project of Liberation, curated by Maggie Adler, Williams class of 99, and MA class of 2011, curator of painting, sculpture, and works on paper at the Amon Carter Museum of American Art in Fort Worth, Texas. Maurita Poole, director and chief curator at the Newcomb Art Museum at Tulane University in New Orleans, who was, in fact, the Mellon Curatorial Fellow here at WCMA from 2012 to 2015. Maggie and Maurita, welcome back. We're delighted to have you here. On site, curatorial contributions from Destinee, Filmore, MA, class of 23. And until very recently, about 6 weeks ago, WCMA Mellon Curatorial Fellow. Now, Assistant Curator of Modern and Contemporary Art at the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York. On-site curatorial contributions also from our colleague Kevin Murphy, WCMA's Eugenie Prendergast Senior Curator of American and European Art. Conceived as a commemoration of the 160th anniversary of the Emancipation Proclamation, the exhibition visualizes what freedom looks like for Black Americans and the legacy of the Civil War today and beyond. Highlighting the perspectives of contemporary Black artists, Emancipation features commissioned and recent works by Sadie Barnette, Alfred Conteh, Maya Freelon, Hugh Hayden, Letitia Huckaby, Jeffrey Meris, who's here tonight. Jeffrey, welcome. There you are. And Sable Elyse Smith, who's also here tonight. Welcome. Alongside historic artworks, most importantly, The Freedmen by John Quincy Adams Ward. Our WCMA curators were able to incorporate important documents to help contextualize what this exhibition means in Williamstown. I'm so grateful for the generosity and collaboration of the artists in this project. Thank you to those who are here, and thank you from a distance to those who are not here tonight. And I'm looking forward to hearing Maggie, Maurita, and Destinee talk more about all of their work tonight. I also want to share a big thanks to all of the institutional lenders for this exhibition, and especially our local colleagues, Kathy Morris at the Clark and Ann Peel at the Chapin Library, for collaborating with us on the historical materials. So hopefully you all got a chance to look upstairs, and we hope you'll come back many times to see the exhibition anytime between now and July 14th. So we'll have it for a while. In addition to the galleries, we invite you to spend time in our new interpretation space, which features a library of texts related to the exhibition, alongside more opportunities to explore themes from the show, including a map of the Upper Housatonic Valley's African American Heritage Trail, which we encourage you to experience. On March 7th, we'll host Dr. Frances Jones Sneed, who's also here tonight, for a lecture about the history of emancipation in the Berkshires. And on April 12th, Dr. Kendra Field, class of '99, will give a public lecture about African American genealogical research. As always, both events are free and open to the public, as is the museum always. It's something of note that Maggie, Maurita, and Destinee represent 3 generations of the Williams arts leadership and museum leadership tradition, returning here to the college tonight to help us think through the really exciting and complex issues in this exhibition. It's great to have you all back, and just to have you all here helping us understand how you're shaping the museum world out there. Thank you. It's pretty incredible, and I'm just delighted and so very grateful that you're here. So without further ado, let me turn it over to the 3 of you to have your conversation. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Pam, for that incredible introduction, and to you, Maggie and Maurita, for being here in conversation with me tonight. And of course, to each and every one of you for coming out to show such tremendous support for this exhibition. It's been a long time coming, and we are the 3rd venue and the only one located in the Northeast. So we're very special in that way, and we've required the presence of the curators, of course, to give us the context that we need to fully understand and explore the origin story of this show, and to really think about how it might have shifted and changed here. So we're going to chat for a little bit and have a conversation amongst ourselves, and then open it up for questions or comments that you all might have later on about halfway through. So I'm, again, so excited to be here in conversation with each of you. And I suppose the first question that I'll ask is a bit about the origin story of the exhibition. Maggie, do you want to begin?
So I'll just, is it on? Yeah. Nope. Okay. I'll just say that I think the last time I spent a significant amount of time in here was my final exams as an undergrad. So my heart is pounding, and I'm not normally a nervous public speaker. I was asked to talk about what Robert Venturi would think of the Hagia Sophia. So I'm like actually having a moment of a little bit of a flashback. So anyway, I'm really, really glad to be back here, and I've always wanted to play with those pointers. So anyway, yeah, it's really, I mean, it's just wonderful to be back at such a formative place in all of our lives. What is the origin of the exhibition? It really started from a kind of liberal arts query at the Amon Carter for me with John Quincy Adams Ward's The Freedmen. So I was trained as a 19th century person with great passion for contemporary art, and I always thought of the Freedmen. Ours is one of 8 copies of this sculpture, unique in that it possesses a key to unlock the shackle. But I often thought of this sculpture, always presented it as highly aspirational for the 19th century. So it is a sculpture in which the figure is emancipating himself, which was really important based on just the other precedents that we can think of and that you saw upstairs of images of emancipation, and particularly the fact that it was completed before the end of the Civil War, before the outcome of the Civil War was certain, and before the significance of the Emancipation Proclamation was yet to be felt. So that started it, and what really propelled the project forward was a conversation with Alfred Walker, who was our head of our building at the Carter for 42 years. His father built the Amon Carter Museum as one of the construction workers. And we asked on the 60th anniversary of the museum for anybody who wasn't a curator to write a label about something in the collection. And Alfred chose the Freedmen, and he wrote about his experiences coming to the museum from the Stop Six neighborhood of Fort Worth, which was an all-black neighborhood, and how he just kept looking at that sculpture, and that for him the presence of the shackles meant a continuing presence of the legacy of enslavement. And he just said, but Maggie, the shackles are still there. And I said, okay, that's an exhibition. And that's really the beginning of a very long process of developing a show, we always knew that we wanted to put the artistry and the intelligence into the hands of artists living today whose work inherently dealt with issues of emancipation, incarceration, liberation, lack of freedom. And that is the beginning of the story with Horace Ballard, who was at WCMA originally, and with Maurita. Yeah, so shout out to Horace. I was hoping he was going to be here today, but with Horace Ballard, we began to select the artists, and we enlisted the help of Maurita to bring the exhibition to fruition, and that is what you see upstairs on the walls.
I would add to that my reason for wanting to participate. At the time when Maggie and Horace came to me, I was the director and curator of Clark Atlanta University Art Museum's collection. That collection is one of the foremost collections of 20th century African American art, and it was started by Hale Woodruff in 1942. When they approached me with this project, I thought it was really critical to have a conversation on that campus in the South, where the majority of the population is, when I say majority, I mean like 95% of the population is African American, for us to kind of reconsider the position and status of African Americans in relationship to the nation state, to the United States. And also, I wanted us to look at this work of that depicted a black man liberating himself for a new generation of students who needed to know that black people had always been foundational to this country and critical to liberating themselves and ensuring the kind of the continuities within their communities. So it seemed like a natural thing for me to participate in. And so in looking at the catalog, you'll notice that if you have the opportunity to read it, I focus a lot on that collection because even until today, people don't know about its existence and about many of the wonderful artists that are in that collection. And also how the themes that began during the period of slavery remain at the forefront of contemporary black artists' minds, and how they are still contemplating our relationship to the United States and what constitutes true freedom or emancipation or liberation, and this continual dialogue. And I thought it would be a good way for me to contribute to this wonderful project that was started by Maggie and Horace.
Thank you. And so it's so fascinating to know that an exhibition that is so contemporary heavy started with a 19th century sculpture. And so I know the story about how the artists that we know as this fantastic roster came to be, or how they were selected. But I'd be really curious if you all could sort of talk us through your process of identifying these artists and then ultimately selecting who would be a part of helping you tell this story.
Okay. Yeah, thank you for that question. We really agreed on the artists that we were interested in. We started with Letitia Huckaby, who is a Fort Worth-based artist, and someone I had just been desperate to work with over the course of my time at the Carter. And we played like a kind of do you like this artist? Oh, I like this artist. So that's really how it transpired. Always with the notion that a lot of people who are asked to speak on historical topics of blackness and of the Civil War are not artists in 3 dimensions. So we really were starting with a sculptor and a sculpture, and we wanted people who were well-versed in sculpture or installation or 3-dimensional work. And we wanted a early to mid-career, and everybody is now super beyond mid-career, but those were artists that we really wanted to look at, particularly because many shows rely on East Coast or West Coast artists to tell the story of the United States, and that wasn't a fulsome story that could be generated. There's no real magic to the selection other than you like what you like and you do some research and you find artists whose work really speaks to the topic. the only mandate, the only prompt that we gave the artists were, make work that is related to your experience of the United States today and emancipation and issues of freedom. You didn't have to respond to John Quincy Adams Ward. That was just like sort of the excuse to do the show, and then you could go from there. So that was sort of how the process began to unfold.
And then over time, as we communicated and as we transitioned and I took on a different role, I also wanted us to think through the selection and to really ensure that we had voices of artists who have a very strong relationship to the South. Because in speaking about these issues, often people will draw upon artists, not only because they're more well-known, but most of them are from the Northeast, and they are speaking about the region from the perspective of people who no longer live in the region. So you'll notice that a lot of these artists are actually Southern artists. And because I am a daughter of the South, as odd as that sounds, I also wanted us to look at the cross-section. So we started with Letitia, who's a Texan, and that's very distinctive and very different from Georgians and and Horace being from Virginia and having that connection, he often was bringing that out. And I noticed like a little while in, I was like, you guys have no Georgians. Like, where are my Georgians and my folks from Alabama? I mean, we have something to say too, and it's kind of it's a slight variation on this theme. So I wanted us to take that into consideration as well, and that's something that we also see. And it's nice to have folks from the West Coast and who can bring that sort of perspective. But in a lot of ways, we can see that drawn out and the kind of the range of ideas. But most importantly, in the 21st century, you can't have this conversation without dealing with the global South and the Caribbean, which in many ways has always been very much a part of the African American experience, even when we don't acknowledge it. And even when those people are collapsed and just perceived as just like a generic flatlined African Americans. And so in that regard, I was very pleased to have Jeffrey in the show and to know that he was one of the initial artists that was selected, and to be an artist of Haitian descent and from the Bahamas, and those being two significant sites for the development of African American consciousness and the ways we think about independence and revolution and liberation. It just made sense to have an artist of his stature in it as well.
I will also say we started the project in 2018, so we did this all over Zoom. And so up until today, we had not met all the artists in person. So got to meet Sable today, so yay. But so we organized this over the course of the pandemic without being able to do studio visits, without being able to have the kind of engagement that we would normally have. So that's something that people don't realize how long it takes to put together an exhibition.
But it's also a testament to those artists, the fact that we could have that level of confidence in them and that they actually produced, despite the fact that we did not have that consistent in-person interaction with them. And the results, they're really incredible. And we saw the works for the first time in person in Texas, and that's was years later. So having worked with other contemporary artists, I must say it was a relief to see the amazing quality of the work that was produced for the show.
And I think it's also important to note that the production of the catalog also happened similarly at a stage before all of the works are completed. And so it's so fascinating to me that this book that you all have created is still so resonant with everything that we are experiencing and seeing inside of the galleries. And I thought that we were in a very lucky spot here at WCMA because the show had been up twice, and I had the opportunity to see it both at the Newcomb in New Orleans and at the Amon in Fort Worth. And one of the questions that Kevin and I kept asking ourselves throughout the planning and the thought of our receipt of the exhibition was, why WCMA? Why WCMA? Why here? Why now? And then further, how can we make sure that the story is WCMA specific? And so you two had all day yesterday and all day today to really embed yourself inside of the exhibition. And I'm curious if you can speak to any of the significant shifts that you've noticed or things that we were able to do here because of the point in time that our venue came up that maybe you had considered or thought about before.
I mean, I think why WCMA, I mean, it's a pretty a pretty emotional answer, which is that I firmly believe that the work that academic art museums do to show their moves, to show that there's not a disembodied or authoritative head that just knows everything and puts all that knowledge onto the labels and that person is right. That's, opening up that process to transparency is part of what happens here, that has translated into my belief of what museums should be for their publics, not just academic art museums for their publics. So, I'm like a very converted to the world of academic art museums, and the idea that all of you, particularly all of you students, could take this and run with it and use something from it to do your own work. I don't want to be the voice for future generations. I want that opportunity to present itself to new people. So that's why WCMA was Horace originally, and also like the idea that if this thing went well, WCMA would benefit from it, and then so that's like a way of giving back as an alum, which is exciting to me. But yes, the idea of a tour that included 3 academic art museums with the Amon Carter, like this random museum in Texas, was really very appealing to me. The kind of openness to the type of programming that you all are going to do, to bring the Massachusetts 54th into this conversation in a robust way, to bring the Berkshire experience and the history of Massachusetts into this, to do things that I probably couldn't have done at the Amon Carter because it's illegal in Texas to talk about some of these things, So that was really part of it, but it was really just the possibility of partnership with you and with Maurita and with Horace, and the idea that people would teach from it, and then to have the show to have you transform the show everywhere that it's gone. People don't do that in museums, right? Like you take a show, you're like, good, now I don't have to do extra work because the show already exists. But, Maurita and Destinee and Kevin and everybody took it upon themselves to make it an important story for the people who would be seeing it in the places that they were seeing it. So, in Texas, we were all about Opal Lee, right? And my goal was like, Opal Lee, the grandmother of Juneteenth, better come to this exhibition. And boy, did she ever, with her church groups, with her quilting circles, like she's now my grandma. I now serve on her committees for her National Juneteenth Museum. But, this was a possibility for this show to expand and grow. And literally, I'm looking at Barbara Robertson. I gave my first tour here at WCMA, and any time that someone says, "Oh, you give a good tour," I can credit it to William. So that was a really long-winded personal answer. So why don't you do the professional answer?
Not necessarily more professional, but more distance, maybe, just a little. So I think as someone who's very much committed to academic museums and to university museums, which are the only places that I have ever wanted to work, I think that it was a no-brainer for it to be at WCMA as one of the foremost teaching museums in the country. But also, if we were going to go outside of the region, it makes sense to come to New England, which has played such a critical role in abolition and in this historic period when thinking about the concept of emancipation. So in that regard, it made sense. But ultimately, I think whenever you're at an academic institution, it's not only the audiences of the students, but these are the places where you get the foundational training, and you have the scholars who do the deep thinking and who are going to help people unpack and delve into concepts that are very critical, and to have formed their own ideas based on evidence and scholarship in a way that you don't always get in a civic museum. And for something like the Emancipation Proclamation and these ideas, you needed a place like WCMA where we would have access to rare materials that you can't see anywhere else. Where else do you get a bust like that of Abraham Lincoln to put in conversation? Where else do you have records from Thomas Jefferson? I have never lived in a town where people with the 4th of July really means something else and is foundational for people to talk about Frederick Douglass in the way that they do. And so in a lot of ways, if it had had to be somewhere outside of the South, this place naturally makes sense, but also because we knew that they would get the in-depth scholarship and like close looking and engagement that it deserves. And so, and hopefully from that, it would then extend its reach. And whether we like to admit it or not, or state it or not, people know the outsized influence of Williamstown. And it's because of the training, and it's because of the things that you do here, and you can transform and make a difference and have a reach that other places cannot. And so in some ways, it's a double-edged sword to acknowledge the reality, but in other ways, it's also a very pointed and thoughtful thing to do if we're trying to transform people's consciousness about ideas about emancipation and what it means to be an American in the 21st century.
Absolutely, and that reminds me, even in the span of time that I've been back, which is just since yesterday, there have only been 3 classes that have met in the exhibition. I think an English class, a public history class, and another. And I think there's plans for a robotics class to come and to look at your machines, Jeffrey. And so. There's a class from Vermont here tonight. Hi, y'all. It's truly amazing what is possible here, and then this sort of deep academic engagement will continue and sustain itself. And I know that Sandra Burton will bring her students here and have them activate and engage with the museum and with the exhibition and all of the materials that are within it. So I'm getting the warning, and so. Just kidding. It's just an accident, so I'll keep going and just share, I suppose, a little bit about some of the historical materials that we decided to pull because it really was just such a wonderful opportunity to work with Ann Peel and Kevin to dive into the treasure trove that is literally across the street at the Chapin Library of Rare Books. We went to Ann over a year ago and asked her, what do we have in the collections that is connected to the history of enslavement? And it turned out a lot, and very many kinds of materials. A lot of the broadsides that you see, not on screen right now, sort of scattered throughout the exhibition on the walls came from Chapin, and these are historical materials that lived with people and lived in communities. You can see the nail holes when they were torn down still. But then we also thought, well, it's quite important that we put the Emancipation Proclamation on view, and so you can see a copy of the Emancipation Proclamation today, right now, upstairs. You did. And within this sort of case of discrete objects, we've been able to tell so many various stories. The story of Ellen Craft and how she and her husband emancipated herself using a disguise where she dressed herself as a disabled white man and escaped from enslavement in Georgia all the way to Boston. And the way that the city of Boston sort of surrounded her and her husband when bounty hunters came to collect them after the Fugitive Slave Act was passed in the 1850s. And so in doing this research, it became very important for Kevin and I, and then also our colleagues Roz and Beth and Liz and Rebecca, to think about the history of the Berkshires, its African-American history and how it's been told already. And that work could not have been done without Dr. Frances Jones Sneed and the work that she and her colleagues have done to commemorate the history and to create the African-American Upper Housatonic Valley Cultural Heritage Trail. I've been working on that one. And it's been replicated in this exhibition, but it is through the work that they did that we were able to identify that there were 82 enlistees in the 54th, in the Fighting 54th Massachusetts Regiment from this region, and that 2 of them came from Williamstown, from this very place. That's amazing. We were able to figure out and learn of the sort of potential position that Williamstown had on the Underground Railroad as people were transported from Troy in order to find their way through upper Massachusetts and further up into Vermont. It's really amazing what's happened here, and it's also amazing what the contemporary artists have been able to pull out of our community. A set of students had the opportunity to engage with Maya during her installation and work with her to put the work in its place here, because it's a site-specific installation. And so I'm incredibly grateful to both of you for the work that you've done and the flexibility that you've built into this exhibition, because it's made us possible for us to tell this story of this place in a very nuanced way that I hope everyone will continue to contribute to and be a part of.
I'd also like to add that some of this is also greatly indebted to a very controversial field as well. It's an anthropological approach to doing an exhibition. Each time you do something, and I am a cultural anthropologist by training, I'm not an art historian. And so one of the things that I felt was really important when I came on board was for us to make sure that we were telling the story through the objects and we were going to get that deep art historical aspect to it, but that because of the nature of the topic, it needed to be meaningful in each context. You needed to have local audiences respond to something and to see something of their history in the story and to realize this is a national issue and that it will always be a national issue, but you can't get that unless you allow people to draw on materials that come from their kind of local sites or their hometown, so it allows them to see themselves in their particular histories. And so I think, well, as I have seen this exhibition over the past few days, and when I go upstairs, it's so striking to see what feels like a New England aesthetic. I mean, you know, to see that like Wedgwood blue and that gray, and it's so formal and so different from New Orleans in the South, and which has all that glitteriness, and so different from Texas, which was so pink, and so very, very pink.
Yeah, like the ye olde font that's upstairs. You know, so the Amon Carter is a museum of historical American art, right? So we wanted to make sure that people who saw the billboards or who saw, started to enter the exhibition knew that they were in for something different from the Carter. So we leaned into Sadie Barnette's pink, like hard, and made everything, like this is not your grandma's Amon Carter Museum, there's pink everywhere. It was the closest that we came to a white cube New York gallery. Like our designer was like, wait, what? You're not gonna paint the walls a color? I'm like, no, it's gonna be real contemporary. So, so it just really does look shocking upstairs because it's like,
It's crisp, it's clean, it's reserved, it's very New England. It's lovely. It's not New Orleans, which has its beauty and its charm. I did try to tone it down for my audiences because we could have gone in we love our beats and our glitz there, but so I made sure I didn't do that. But one thing that was critical at Newcomb Art Museum, because historically it was a space for women artists, is that we highlighted women more in that iteration of it. And we foregrounded like the experience of slavery from the perspective of women in that context because of that history. And that was really important. So I'm very pleased when I go upstairs to have another way of envisioning and thinking about something that I thought I knew very well, but that every time it's a beautiful surprise, and it's wonderful to see how deep and rich this history is and how it can be presented visually in very different, striking, but all equally important and gorgeous and thoughtful ways. And so just hope that you all realize that it's just I hope you'll be able to get to the last version in Georgia, which will have its own version of like twang to it. So, but so.
Well, it's so funny that both of you bring up the pink that you use, because when we saw the pink, we were like, this is Wickma pink. It's true. We can't be Wickma pink. I think, but then and then with the New England crispness that you're reading into it, that was part of really Brian Repetto's amazing genius design thinking, because we weren't going to have a color story actually. We weren't going to have any color. We thought, okay, we'll just let the vibrancy of the work speak, and we'll lean maybe on the coloring from the paper as it ages, but we were looking and we were like, some Wedgwoodish blue would be really nice. And we wanted to take that and carry it through the exhibition. So you'll see the text that has the quotes from each of the artists above their section. It's actually a very deep blue, and it's the same shade of blue that's on the intro text panel when you first walk in. And so it was really fun to play around a little bit with color and to think about how it might be a part of telling the story of the exhibition, because it really was a fascinating story to tell. And I'm glad that I have learned enough about New England to be able to replicate a New Englandish. As a daughter of the South also, I was like, well, okay, we'll see what we can do. But that was the amazing part about having Kevin really as this guiding force throughout the entire process of building this exhibition. He was very trusting in my capabilities, but also really generous and showing me perhaps another way forward that I hadn't considered. So I feel like I've been given a lot of great learning opportunities through this exhibition, and that it's prepared me well for a lot of other things. And so I wonder if it's time maybe to transition to a couple of questions and to open up our conversation to the folks in the audience. See a question. You can pretend. Yes, please, ma'am. What is your question? This is a friend.
Thrilled to share learning experiences, not just about the art historical content, but about institutional responsibility and curatorial choices with each of you at different times and at different institutions. And I'm so curious, you've talked so beautifully about what this show meant to you art historically and how you wanted to take away, and this is a horribly mean question, but like, you know, you have one day to teach a curatorial seminar, and like, what did I do right in this show that I didn't get the opportunity, chance, didn't have the experience to do right otherwise? Because I think the model that you all are talking about of reciprocal collaboration and joyful celebration of how an exhibition evolves in different contexts is the type of thing that we talk about a lot in museums, but and it sounds so easy and it is so hard to do. So selfishly, tell us the answer, please.
Okay, I'll give it a try. I think what emerged as very successful for us as a working group was to be deeply collaborative across departments, and so very early on. And also what helped is having all the text written already and not having to write all the labels and only supplementing or amending them and adding like sort of widgets. And ultimately, I think we ended up writing just a few specific texts that were about our context. So that helped a lot. But after that, working really, I think, directly and collaboratively with our colleagues like Roz and Beth and Rebecca and so many other people in the museum to get an understanding of what the construction of this exhibition looked like from their perspective and what the stakes were from their positions and what I needed to do as this primary organizer to deliver to each of them. Because in doing that, the show was a little early, which never happens in museums. But in doing that, we were really able to lean on the expertise of Brian and understanding the design and what we needed to do, the artists that really needed to be here, like Jeffrey, because his work is so beautifully complex and difficult to install, but we did it. And we did it because we had a really great team. So the cop-out answer is we have a great team, and we worked really well together, and that's how we were able to arrive at the successful iteration of the exhibition in this manner. But one thing that was brought to my attention, actually, which is a feedback from a visitor, is that we didn't give enough context for the contemporary art. I was so focused on making sure that folks had all this historical context and letting the contemporary work speak for themselves, which is how I've been taught, that I didn't give enough, according to this visitor. And I will take that as a very accurate and adequate criticism or contribution or thought, and that's something that I wish that we could have done. But I do think we'll be able to have a very vast collection of materials from the conversations that the three of us have had together or separately that we'll be able to make available on Bloomberg Connects. Everyone should download the Bloomberg Connects app and use it in the show so that you could get this extra supplemental information. And so I think that those are probably the ways that we were very successful and what worked for us, and maybe something that will work a bit better on next time.
I would say from the beginning, though, I think one of the things that made the collaboration work even across states and functioning mostly on Zoom and by phone is that we were committed to the project and that we had people in the room who were very open and honest, and we were having, this is actually a very difficult show to put together and to have these frank conversations. But Maggie is a very thoughtful, forthcoming person, and I am too. And I have no problem expressing what I think and also giving my perspectives based on my experience. But I wanted to honor the origins at Amon Carter in terms of the object. But there were other things contextually that I felt were really critical, and Maggie actually listened, and also Horace's input was invaluable. And I knew that by the time that it got here, there was nothing to worry about. We were trained here. And I knew you had like the creme de la creme of like professionals here. So I knew they were gonna take it to a level that even we couldn't conceive. And in each location, I feel the same way. I would say in the context of New Orleans, once I had to move from Atlanta, which is my home, that was actually very challenging, but it meant that for our small staff, which at Newcomb is only 9 of us, as a staff, we went over every single text and really spent a lot of time trying to figure out what was missing for the Louisiana context. and how to bring in that kind of French influence that's so critical to the experience there, and making sure that the people in the room felt like they were being seen and heard, and that they were a part of this broader story that is still deeply impacts them today, but in slightly different ways. And so I think the most important thing that I see happening, whether it's curatorially, any sort of collaboration and with educators, is sitting down and taking the time to talk, frankly, honestly, listen, and to really be comfortable having serious debates and like honoring what people are saying, but taking it into consideration and making some hard choices together. And I think that's the way forward in terms of doing any project well.
Sure. Is this going out on the internet? Is my home museum going to see this? Anyway, how am I going to answer this question if they are? I have learned to be very, very patient in meeting people where they are. So if it were up to me, we would have done this show a long time ago. We would have been dealing with shows that aren't just aesthetically pretty at the museum. But I recognized, I've been at the Carter now almost 11 years, and I recognized that this was not going to have this kind of shift in exhibitions was not going to happen overnight. So could I sort of, put the lobster in the pot and with the water slightly warm, let the water heat up, and the lobster doesn't know what's happening? All right, fine. I chose lobster. Yeah, I love lobster. Anyway, this is sort of a successive campaign at the museum to try to contextualize for our board, for our staff, for the people of our city, that American art is not just about John Singer Sargent. And I will still get like, okay, you did this, that's great. Can we now have a Georgia O'Keeffe exhibition? And I will continue to say that you don't know what something is going to mean for the community until you do it. And so, yes, a Georgia O'Keeffe museum or exhibition is going to draw a huge number of people from Fort Worth. This draws more because people finally feel seen and acknowledged and heard. And I think over the course of my career, I know I'm doing a lot of talking now, but over the course of my career, I've realized that it is okay and actually preferable to take a step back and to just be the sort of catalyst for these works to come together and to honor shared expertise. And if nobody else in the museum is going to do it, I'm going to do it, but I'm going to do it in a way that doesn't privilege my voice and put that in the forefront. So, and I do that because my firm belief that I could be in academia, but the museum is about the visitors and meeting them where they are. And so what is going to serve the people of Fort Worth and then now beyond in a way that uplifts the experience of living in Fort Worth, which can be tough. And so that really is, does that answer your question, Sarah? I'm not really sure. Okay. Yeah, but I think I'm getting a little bit more, a little less patient over the years. So it's like I was okay being patient at the beginning, but I'm not patient with backsliding.
Hi, I was very interested in the comment you made about the fact that you knew that this was what you always wanted to do. And so as an educator, was very interested when you talk about the origins of the piece and the curation, your origins, as to how you knew that this was your calling, and because representation matters, having women, particularly women of color, in this field is very important, and how can we develop the next generation of you to come?
Of me? Of the three of us. Oh, yes, I'll repeat the question. If I'm remembering correctly, you're asking us. No, I can't remember, of course. How did we know we wanted to do this? What our origin stories are, and how we arrived here, and the work that we do. I'll begin. My origin story goes all the way back to Tampa, Florida, which is where I was born and raised. And Tampa is this incredibly multicultural, vibrant place, and I learned to love and make art there. And when I went to Spelman College as an undergraduate, I thought that I would continue this practice as a maker. But one day I was in the museum, and there's this intro to curatorial studies class happening, and they're trying to figure out what to do with this extra space in the museum, how to activate it. And I had a friend in the class, so I texted her my idea. I was like, I think you all should do this. And the professor in the class is like, well, where is this girl? Just tell her to come here. Tell her to join the circle. The professors, which were Dr. Andrea Bonrow-Brownlee and Miss Ann Collins-Smith, who were both the director and chief curator and curator of collections at the Spelman College Museum of Fine Art. And so I joined this circle, and it was amazing. I was electrified. I hadn't spoken about art like this in ages. I was remembering all these things, and I had all these ideas. And soon after, they invited me to go to DC with them for the James A. Porter Colloquium, which is hosted at Howard University annually. And there I just sort of stepped into this world of African-American art historians who showed me the very lively and robust histories that they were thinking about it and writing and rewriting. And I thought, okay, maybe I could do it. And that summer, I landed an internship at the Crystal Bridges Museum of Art. And I was working with Allison Glenn while she was there. She was a curator of contemporary art. And so here was this woman of color showing me live and in color what it meant to be a curator working at an American art museum. And they sort of just kept coming, and I had these opportunities to travel through school to learn more about the field, about practice, to visit the Clark Atlanta University galleries and to see the gorgeous, amazing collection, the treasure trove really of African American modernist art that's there, and to learn with Dr. Poole and to also learn within a community of students. And so I just kind of kept doing that, and then I got a Mellon undergraduate curatorial fellowship at the High, which sort of turned me into the curator that I am today and taught me how to research and taught me to think about makers outside of the canon. And from there, I landed here. I was here for 2.5 years working as a Mellon curatorial fellow alongside Jordan Horton and Nicholas Liu and Kevin Murphy and Elizabeth Sandoval and Lisa Doran, and they taught me another way to understand curatorial work. And I also learned another canon as a master's student in the Williams MA program. And so all of that together manifested in who I am today, which is a person who is actively interested in expanding the story of American modernism and working across time, thinking about the ways that historical objects can be in conversation with things made yesterday, or thinking about the way that things made yesterday are actively thinking about and riffing on, or sometimes unconsciously riffing on, things that were made 160 years ago. And so doing all that work and being able to pull from these different sort of art historical pedagogies and canons has made it possible for me to then now go to the Met and do the same exact work, to think about early 20th century artists and of color, women and folks who are historically marginalized working in the United States and around the United States, and also sort of all striving towards the goal of expressing themselves. And so that's my origin story and how I ended up here, back on stage.
So as curators, we're really good at weaving a seamless narrative that makes it seem as though everything was very logical and followed a prescribed path. That was not at all the case. So I did study art history and classical languages at Williams. Then I floundered. I wore leather pants and rode a Vespa and worked for internet companies, tried to start a restaurant. My friend bailed on me. She was the chef. I was like, oh, maybe I should have stayed at Williams as a student forever. And so I applied for every job at the college that involved people or writing or communication or pathological extroversion, and didn't get any of them. And then I got a job in the development office at Williams doing something that I was horribly bad at, which was like tax law. I couldn't do math, and that's what I had to explain to people, is like how you could make a gift to the college that wasn't money. And then that actually connected me with WCMA. In terms of all gifts to the college that were not gifts of cash. So artwork, Chapin Library books, church pews from the college chapel, Thompson. And at that point, people kept asking me, well, if you could have any job in the world, what would it be? And I said, well, maybe I want to do fundraising for an art museum because I always loved art museums. Well, 2 weeks into my first fundraising job for an art museum, I was like, this was a horrible mistake because doing fundraising separated from art was fine, but being in the museum and being the person that nobody wanted to talk to, particularly artists, was gut-wrenching. And so I thought, how am I going to get out of this? I did that for 3 years, raised money for a new museum, a new building, and I did that for 3 years, and I was like, I think the way I'm going to get out of this is to go back to school. And the only place I could think of that I didn't have to retake the GREs was Williams. And so I was like, well, that sounds good, because I was already can I say grown-ass? I was already a grown-ass adult, and I'm making good money, and I thought, well, I know Williamstown, and I'm just going to pretend that this is a job, and I'm not going to hang out with anybody, and that was false, because I slept on futons in dormitories. And anyway, so that's how I became a curator. So after, yeah. But what I said to students today at lunch is like, there are not a lot of narratives through Williams College of failure. There are a lot of narratives of like, it just occurred to me as an epiphany that I wanted to be a museum director, and then I was the director of the Whitney, and isn't that amazing? That is not like the reality of things. And I think I probably ended up exactly where I should have been all along. And I think the things that I carried forward in all those moments was being about people, being about conveying a sense of atmosphere, being about meeting people where they are and creating experiences for them that speak to them. And that was true of whether I was asking them for money or serving them food or, preaching to them on the internet. So that's the leitmotif that goes through.
That's a tough act to follow, man.
Your story is badass.
My story is long-winded, and so what we're gonna do is my version is actually closer to Maggie's than it is to Destinee's. But in an earlier life, I actually had this dream of working for the FBI that never worked out. But in terms of my love of art, it never occurred to me that it could be a job. I just happened to grow up in a family of people who love free things. And when I was a kid, my parents were like, we're taxpayers, we want our kids educated. So we spent a lot of time in libraries and in art museums. That's where they would take us. And they were like, if you educate yourself and you get exposed, then your mind will be open and we can take you, these things will take you beyond anything we can do for you on our own from our background. I'm from rural people, and I'm first generation city. So my family is from such small towns. People don't know, they don't know these places. Let's just say my mom's from the mountains, and the biggest town is a town that nobody knows, which is near another town, which is near another town, which is near another town, which is near the big town of Rome, which we think is a big deal, but other people are like, Rome in Georgia or in Italy? It's in Georgia. And so all of that is to say, somewhere along the way from doing all of that, I developed these fantastical ideas that my parents thought were bananas, but they thought, well, it's a new generation, we want to kill our daughter's dream. And along the way, I started studying Arabic language. I had the opportunity to go to Egypt when I was in the 9th grade through a governmental program, and it turned out I was very good at languages and linguistics. And I managed to get a full scholarship to go to Georgetown University to major in Arabic languages and linguistics. So I thought I was going there to eventually get a good government job, and that's not what happened. And all the while, I would just go to the Smithsonian. I would go look at art because I loved art, and I thought that's what people did because it was free and there was food and it was great. And I thought, well, this is what you do. You get a job and you make money and then you go look at art. Well, anyway, along the way, I graduated. I did not get a job with the government. I did everything I was supposed to. I feel like my story is one of doors just being slammed in my face. So yes, I was like, I'm on the honor roll. I did blah, blah, blah. So no, basically Quantico said no. And so after that, I went back home. I was like, I can't stand this. So I said to my parents, this is really driving me crazy. Would you mind if I just decided to move overseas somewhere? And they were like, as long as you pay for it, we don't care. And so I worked and I moved to London. And I thought, okay, I'm going to get it this time. I'm overseas. I'm working in this internship, the Mountbatten internship. I hated my job. So what did I do? I'd pretend like I was sick, and I'd go to the museums. And I would just be hanging out. And I'd be like, I can't come in. I've got to go to the British Museum. And so anyway, did that for about a year and had a really wonderful friend from Georgetown who was living in Brazil. And I said, you know, in Europe, they get a whole month off. I'm coming. And so I went to see her. She was an anthropologist studying what people in Bahia thought about blackness. And I said, you get paid for this? And she said, yes. I said, I'm in. I applied to graduate school. I got lucky to get accepted to Emory University, even though I didn't know anything about anthro, but they said it was okay because I had a curious mind. And they were like, and so I said, okay. So I did that for a while, thinking I was going back to London. Well, anyway, let's just, long story short, that didn't work out. Anyway, I thought, well, maybe I should try to help the world or do something. So I thought, public health, we really need good public health workers. And so managed to get a joint degree in anthropology and public health. And I was like, oh God, this really sucks. But all along the way, I kept looking at art. And I was like, art is really wonderful. Well, then I was very fortunate to have the opportunity to go to New Orleans while I was finishing my dissertation post-Katrina to work at a historically black college called Dillard University. But I didn't know what to do because my training had never prepared me to teach people when there was no library. That's a pretty critical thing. You're like, okay, you wanted us to come down and do what? I mean, what were professors supposed to do? Fortunately, Prospect was happening, and guess who loves art? Yay. And so I thought we can use art to talk about culture and anthropological concepts because artists expand the mind, and it was such a beautiful thing. And I was so ecstatic in telling everybody on campus that a dean and a mentor of mine said, she said, you know, you really like this art thing. Did you ever think about doing art history or working in a museum? I said, who would work in a museum? And she was like, I think you should because you actually talk about art all the time and you hang out in artist studios and at museums. And I thought, why didn't I think of that? So, needless to say, she was nice enough to give me an extension on my fellowship. I got to stay in New Orleans for an extra 3 months, but no job manifested. So I went back home to my parents again. I said, what do you think? They said, we don't care as long as you fund it. The same thing they always say. So I started teaching at Spelman College. I was teaching anthropology, and what do you know? Spelman's got a museum. And I said, let me, in between my anthropology classes, go volunteer in the museum. I still wasn't done with my dissertation, and Ann Collins Smith, a dear friend, she's with a very quirky personality, she said, hey, so what are you about? Do you just like hanging out in the library or in the museum, or do you like want a job? And I was like, you're gonna pay me for this? I'm in. So I started working at Spelman College Museum of Art, and every day, because I knew I didn't know anything officially about art history, I would read on my own. They had like a special art library that was never open because they had no one who would sit there. So I said, I'll do it, and I'll read all the books, and I'll give people access. And I would go across the street to Clark Atlanta University Art Museum 3 times a week, and I'd volunteer, and I'd just look at the art. And so that was my circuitous path, and all along the way, I'm holding off my dissertation advisor and my committee because they were like, what are you doing? I was like, I'm finishing, I promise. And along the way, I discovered there was a program at Williams College Museum of Art, a Mellon Fellowship to learn about curatorial practice. And I thought, I've got nothing to lose. Might as well apply. Well, let's just say when I came for my interview, it was a disaster. Along the way, I fell asleep in the airport and missed my connecting flight. And so I thought, oh my God, what does this mean? Well, people were very professional and very nice, and they got me here. But by the time I got here, I was so distraught. I thought, there's no way in the world they're going to give me this job. And in fact, that turned out to be the best thing that could have ever happened to me because I was anxious because by that time I knew what Williams College was. I had done my research and I was like, this is bananas. And so I'm there to do my presentation. I was supposed to do it in this room, but something was going on, so I had to do it upstairs in the Rose Study Gallery. And so I didn't have a podium to hide my shaking hands. And I was fumbling and mumbling, and I was totally unintelligible. And then something clicked, and I said, they don't understand me anyway, and I'm not going to get this job. So I said, hi, are you okay with me just starting over? Why don't I put everything down, and let's just talk about art? And apparently, that's what got me the job. And I was like, And then, needless to say, I was here for 3 years, and I actually had the opportunity to learn about curatorial practice and spend enough time where they allowed me to experiment, and having mentors like Lisa Doran and Kevin Murphy when he finally came on. I had the chance to curate 3 exhibitions during my time here, all of that were influenced by my deep desire to use art and art objects as a way to talk about difficult issues. And so I've always known that I wanted to be close to intellectuals and scholars because I'm kind of like that fangirl for some obscure like scholar that nobody knows, like Anne Jennings. I'm like, you're the Anne Jennings, the specialist in Egyptian Nubians from the 1970s? And, you know, and people are like, who? And I'm like, oh my God, Anne Jennings is here. But that kind of thing. And so they have a lot of those people in like Williamstown. And it just kind of really worked out. And fortunately, when I left here, I had the opportunity to go back home to Atlanta and to work at Clark Atlanta University Art Museum and to study and work with a collection that I knew was close to my heart, and to make sure that this next generation, I worked with Andrea Barnwell Brownlee for us to develop that curatorial program. And because of my time at Williams, I built an object study classroom in the Atlanta University Center so that people could learn to speak from the objects and so that they would be prepared for careers and for this field. So I'm actually very proud because I remember Destinee would always come into the gallery so eager and excited and prepared, and she would be one of the few students who always be like, I have another. It was brilliant and it was beautiful, and I knew that we had someone, and that's what I'm supposed to do. And I knew that we had someone really special like in our midst, and I wanted to create and craft space for that new generation, which is also why I like to be close to museums. And so that's my path. So it wasn't known. It was just me fumbling around, being myself. And fortunately, my parents said, it's fine, just as long as we don't have to pay for it, you know.
Yeah, and these circuitous paths led you here and led us all here tonight. And I think that's a lovely note to end on. Thank you.